Don't miss out on the games or concerts you want to see. Tickets are available now at Minnesota's very own Ticket King. Visit TicketKingOnline.com. Sports, theater, concerts, and more. TicketKingOnline.com or call 612-341-4131.
Sports chatter over beers with your friends is fun. Sports chatter over beers with the 1500 ESPN crew? That's even more fun. It's time for the Sports Over Beers podcast with Derek Wetmore and a cast of other brew lovers from 1500 ESPN.
Hey, welcome to another episode of Sports Over Beers and Sports Over Beers TV, which might be the worst idea we've ever come up with.
Definitely one of them, yeah, no doubt. We've had some bad ones, too, which is amazing.
I mean, it's already sort of a mediocre podcast, and then we decided to put our mediocre faces on the podcast.
True.
I'm Phil Mackey, Derek Wetmore, Judd Zulgad.
It's a fantastic idea. I have no idea what you guys are talking about.
Well,
it incorporates
you're rocking the thong
television
sandals and a 612 lager right there. So.
Not to mention my nice shorts. My plaid shorts.
Life is good for Judd Zulgad.
Yes, it is.
So we're kind of doing this thing where you can either watch this on our YouTube page, 1500 ESPN's YouTube page. So it would be youtube.com/1500 ESPN Twin Cities. Did I get that right?
That's 100% accurate.
Or if you're watching this on that page and you're like, holy cow, this is way too many radio faces, you can just listen to the audio without watching our faces. On iTunes, you can subscribe to Sports Over Beers or SoundCloud.com/1500 ESPN or just the website. And I think this is sort of a conversation that comes in spurts over the last couple of years, but we're here to talk about and maybe even hold an intervention for a man who's not actually in this room.
Oh, good.
Joe Mauer.
Got worried for a second there.
I
Unless
I was very
he's standing
concerned.
outside.
No, I think.
No, I was worried about me.
Yeah.
Actually, that's we were going to get.
I'm
to
drinking
that
a
later.
beer, and you said that word, the magic word. And
Joe Mauer. It's funny because we have these conversations about the Twins' offense, and now lately they've been fine at home. I mean, they're good at home, but why can't they score runs like some of the other teams in baseball? Why do they go through these droughts? And every time I start to look at why the Twins might have struggles offensively, the elephant in the room is a guy who used to be the elite on-base average hitter in the major leagues, who now gets on base at the clip of a league average hitter. I mean, Joe Mauer is, and this isn't just this year, it's the last couple of years, he's a shell of his former self.
Yeah.
So I think we should devote a half hour here to what is wrong with Joe Mauer, and will Joe Mauer ever go back to being even close to the hitter he was a couple years ago and before that? And if the answer is no, then what?
Yeah.
With 3 years left on the contract.
we call that fixing the problem for 2016,
Right.
boys, is what we call that.
I almost,
the glitch.
I almost think that the problem is more about how you're dealing with it, right? The question isn't can he hit or can he not. I mean, if he eventually comes around to hit, good, then you've got a great number 3 hitter back in the middle of your order. But right now, you've got like a number 7 hitter hitting third each night and sort of, I don't want to call it torpedoing the offense because it's not like he's the worst hitter on the Twins, but he's the worst hitter in a prominent role, which is amazing considering how great he was for, 10 seasons or whatever before this. 3-time batting champ is now basically the... How many hitters are better than Joe Mauer right now? We could just go
He's
through.
basically a
off the top
second
list.
baseman, right?
Well,
He's
actually,
like-
if you want, I did a little legwork on this, like literally before we
Let
walked
me
on
start
here.
thinking, because then if you've got the answer, we'll go Brian Dozier, Trevor Plouffe.
Oh, you mean just on the
Oh,
team?
no,
Correct.
I'm talking in the league.
Hold on.
Oh.
So there are, since the beginning of 2014, there are 136 qualified hitters with enough at bats to qualify for the batting title.
Huh, okay.
Joe Mauer, if you're ranking by OPS, Joe Mauer is 91st among those
Yikes.
136, and he's right in the mix with Yunel Escobar, Nori Aoki, D. Gordon, slap hitting, singles hitting middle infielders. And the two things those hitters have going for them when they're batting, 270 with a 330 on base, like Joe Mauer is, they play a more premium position. If you're playing an outfield spot or shortstop or second base, and they're fast. Like Nori Aoki's going to steal bases. D.
Right.
Gordon has 35 steals. As
There's
we do this
intangibles
podcast.
there.
Right. Now, Mauer used to have catching. Okay, his numbers are dropping off, but he plays the premium position of all premium
If you
positions.
get any offense from a catcher, you're thrilled. And yeah, he's not doing that anymore. Do you have more on the list, or we could even go Twin specific too?
Well, I've that was the main if you're looking for just the last couple of years, but if you want to stretch this out to first baseman, there are, I believe, 19 qualified first basemen going back to the beginning of last year. And Joe Mauer ranks either bottom half or bottom 5 in almost every major category, from OPS to even on base, which is something that it hasn't completely gone away for him, and he's still something like 12th out of 19 qualified first basemen in the last couple of years. Which was that was the one when he was transitioning to first base, he thought, well, he might not hit for the power, but he's going to blow these other guys away in batting average.
He'd be Mark Grace.
Right.
He'd be a Mark Grace.
Or John Olerud.
So here's my question. After basically 2 years of this, is there any reason to believe, as a starting point, that he can turn this around in 2016? Has he shown anything that leads you to believe that there can be a transition back to being even a shell of the player he was, which at one time was a pretty damn good player?
I think yes, but the more time that we put under this umbrella of, well, he can't do it anymore, the less convinced I am of that. I think this is the most succinct way I can answer your question. He still has spurts where you see that swing, and you know what I'm talking about. There's a different swing. Yeah. You see that, and he ropes a double down the left field line, or on this week he lifts a double to left field to drive in the first run of the game and then scores when Miguel Sano drives in the double. And it's like, okay, that Mauer is useful. That Mauer is very valuable. You want that Mauer hitting in front of Miguel Sano.
I'll take that Mauer.
And if you could have that Mauer for 600 plate appearances, I think you'd be thrilled.
And you get him in spurts of 2 to 3 weeks.
That's what's
you
maddening.
got him for 3 weeks in April, May, and then you got him again around the All-Star break.
That's what's maddening. And I don't know that there's an easy answer to this question, because I think the more you say, if I were answering your question by saying maybe, answering a maybe is kind of a no, right? In this case, you need it to be a yes, and I'm not sure that I could definitively say that the Mauer that we came to know from his call-up to basically the time of the concussion, I don't know that that's still in there.
Joe Mauer now reminds me of the guy that we all work with, who has potential.
Are we going to throw somebody
and
under the bus?
No, but I'm saying,
which one of us two are you about to talk
about?
about?
Right here.
but I'm saying there's always a guy at your workplace like this. He's got potential, right? And every once in a while,
so
you say to yourself, this guy is close to getting himself fired. I mean, he's that dog bleep. He's going to be fired. And then he gets called in for a chat, and he comes out, and for 5 days, guns ablaze, and you're like, he's back, man. That's him. That's the guy.
But it's not. It's not laziness.
No.
There's always the lazy.
But I'm
coworker
saying,
dude, you're going to get fired if you don't hand in something.
But every time we're close to saying, I think he's done. He does what you just said, Derek, which he goes on a spurt, and you're like, okay, there might be something here.
Yeah, but I think that it's different, because in your example, there's like this pressure. There's this, hey, do this or you're fired. Yeah. Joe Mauer is going to be with the Twins, full no-trade clause in his fully guaranteed contract at $23 million a year, and there's nothing sort of poking him other than his own internal desire to be a better player, to be more of a contributing force. And I don't sense that those spurts that we've kind of seen this year and last year even are really indicative of, oh boy, all right, I got to get it going. It's time to get going. He is more of like the slow burn that every once in a while kind of flares up, you know, and that's been sort of maddening for the Twins. I know that for sure, but to go back to kind of the point that I made a couple of minutes ago, that I don't know that you can afford to have that slow burn batting third and expect to score a lot of runs.
He's hitting third right now purely on reputation and purely on what he did 2 years ago and in the 10 years before that.
Yeah.
And it's not like, at least right now, it's not like the Twins have this amazing lineup with the other hitters, because the bottom third of their lineup is mostly replaceable offensively. And then Torii Hunter has kind of fallen off over the last couple months. So you can still sort of get away with it by saying, well, we only have 4 viable hitters, so we're gonna keep putting him up there.
Put their names in a hat and draw them out.
At some point, and I might be getting ahead of myself in this conversation, because I want to make a point sort of like about Joe Mauer when he used to be really good before we talk about what might be next year.
Okay.
At some point, you're going to run into a major logjam with the Max Keplers and whoever else might be coming up, Arcia, Vargas. But I think what actually bothers me the most about the Mauer conversation is the validation that the Mauer haters, quote unquote, think that they're getting right now.
Sure.
Well, you going to come to my side of the fence now, huh? Yeah, Joe Mauer, slap-hitting singles guy.
Because you were a Mauer defender for like how many years?
Well,
right?
for 10, essentially. Or mostly, the Mauer defender stuff, I feel like that gang started organizing in 2010 when well, why doesn't he hit 28 home runs anymore?
Right.
Well, because they moved left field back at this new stadium about seemingly 10 feet.
Yep.
Just in terms of the whatever the geography and the wind, whatever the reason was for why he didn't hit home runs to left field anymore. But to say that you're validated because now everyone's ripping Joe Mauer is to ignore the fact that this guy used to be an elite on base and batting average hitter that went underappreciated in this town. Because I think even though front offices value on base, I think fans largely still value power and RBIs as the only way you can be valuable to a franchise.
Right, yeah. It's on base is getting there. I definitely think more mainstream is seeing the value in somebody drawing a ton of walks, and I think Miguel Sano could help change that conversation too, because he'll hit for some power, but what people are going to start to really appreciate is if he has a 400 on base percentage or a 380 on base percentage.
See, I think that might still go underappreciated. I
Maybe,
think that'll be the part about Miguel Sano that's so much different than other big time power hitters.
It'll help to tip the scales, though. I think it'll help to pull enough people to the side of the fence. And I think correct me if I'm wrong, Phil, I think it's fair to say this, that Joe Mauer is a player who was on a Hall of Fame track who now has virtually no chance of making the Hall of Fame. I mean, he is a guy who was destined. It's not like, oh, this guy might make the Hall of Fame if he lasts for a long time or if things keep going like it. It was, this is a Hall of Fame player right now.
Yeah.
Things just have to not break horribly for him. Mm-hmm. Well, with the concussion and anything else that has caused any of these downward spirals, things have broken horribly for him.
Well, so Judd brought up the name Mark Grace. Sure. If Joe Mauer had moved from catcher to first base and then he became Mark Grace for 6 years, so he then becomes Mark Grace from age 30 to 36 and hits 300 and hits a bunch of doubles and plays 145, 50 games every year and just gets on base, maybe not at a 400 clip, but if he just becomes a really good solid hitter at first base for 5 or 6 years, I think that gets him into the Hall of Fame. Yeah, but he's 2 years in,
well,
and
he won
Mark
3
Grace.
batting titles.
Yeah, he's
and
not Mark
I think
Grace,
a catcher
he's
won
Nori
one in the AL until then. But the thing with Mauer's problems here, I think, are threefold. One, 2009 to 2010, so the power goes down, and people are surprised when they shouldn't have been. I'm telling you, the moment I think that people turned on him was the bunt against Cleveland in 2011,
right.
which, as ridiculous as that seems, if you guys remember, that was a huge deal, and people went nuts. And then the fact that the concussions caught up to him, and people kept saying he can't stay on the field, and they got frustrated by that. And then I think there was this assumption, well, if he plays first base, he's going to hit for power, which was wrong. The surprising thing is that he dropped off so badly, and that could be a result of the concussions, that could be a result of 10 years of catching. But I think all those things put together and mixed up in a bowl caused fans to say, what the hell happened?
Bilateral leg weakness, the mystery of what's really wrong with him.
Durability has always been a thing, too, that people just expect ball players to go through and play 162 games, and when they have a day off, it's frustrating. When you take as many days off as Mauer, it's doubly frustrating because, especially considering he's one of the marquee players on the team, I think the perception is, well, okay, then go be Brian Dozier. Go play 160 games. Why not? That's why you wonder, do the cumulative effects of injuries throughout the year or catching for all those years, does that catch up to your legs, to your body, and really kind of screw things up? I don't know. It's a great mystery, and I'm not what are the guys and gals that work on physiology? I'm not one of those.
You're not a physiologist.
But I don't think a physiologist is what I'm looking for.
Yes, but you're paid to guess about
Correct.
things.
Okay,
so give us your best assumptions.
Like, not a chiropractor because that's the wrong term, but like...
But you did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night.
Did. No, but I am enjoying a 612 brew.
Yeah,
I thought maybe this would
good.
Loosen you up.
Maybe
be more
really.
confident.
I don't know what I want to say, but I want to say something.
But my point is that what a amazing mystery that would be to try to unwrap some of his physical problems in his past. If you could solve that, I think you definitely would have changed the perception, at least externally.
He would have. I'm telling you, to this day, I do think the one thing where he didn't do himself a favors is the fact that when he started to sit out, he's a private guy. And I really believe in this town, if you come out and say, hey, you know what, I'm hurt and blah, 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 and just add to it, people in this town accept it. If you hide something, we in this town think, you're hiding something. What are you hiding? And the Twins did him absolutely no favors.
I mean, it seemed like they were hiding something.
Yeah.
But that's now 4 years ago, and then he came back and he was really productive for 2 years, and now sort of whether it's concussion issues that lingered or he just hasn't been the same guy, because Justin Morneau's performance dropped way off after concussions hit him a couple times, and he might never play again. I don't think he's played to this point in the season after the concussions. But another thing with Mauer, too, on the catching front, you can't discredit catching for 10 years and what that does to your body.
Yeah. Well, more than that, too, right? I mean, through high school and everything.
Yeah, and I know he wasn't an everyday catcher the last couple of years, but he still caught 80 to 110 games, which is 80 to 110 more games than everyone else, and all the other catching he did for years and years. And there's a reason why in the history of baseball, only 7 catchers ever have 300 home runs or more, which is an unbelievable. I mean, think about that.
That's
think
not
about
very
how
many home runs.
There's probably upwards of 150 or 200 outfielders who have at least 300 home runs in their career.
I don't know.
It's more of a longevity thing.
Sure.
Right.
And only one catcher ever, Mike Piazza, has 400-plus home runs. It's a position that just beats you down. Mm-hmm. So if, while we were sitting here for 10 years, and by we I mean the masses, comparing Joe Mauer to Albert Pujols and Miguel Cabrera, why doesn't he hit like Miguel Cabrera? Because Miguel Cabrera is standing at first base or third base, not putting catcher's gear on and squatting with a 6'5" frame every single night almost for 10 years. That absolutely takes a toll.
And don't
on your
forget,
body.
too, for years and years and years, although you certainly did have some good catchers, it was basically fundamentally accepted that if you had a good defensive catcher and shortstop, that was it. Yeah. If your shortstop couldn't hit, your catcher couldn't hit, yeah, too bad. So there was a long time period where a guy like Mauer might have caught in the 60s and 70s, but I think there's an equally good chance that a guy like that gets moved by his big league team to first base at the start of his career.
Which is what happens now, too.
Right. Or third base, or left field, or right field.
Well, remember Bryce Harper? Bryce Harper would not be the offensive player he is right now. Maybe at age 22 he might be, but I still don't think to this degree if they had moved him to the outfield.
Biggio.
Craig Biggio
moved from what? He moved from catcher to second or center field, and then eventually to second. But he was moved out really. He caught what, 2 years for Houston, and that was it. They moved him.
Yeah, and we're in a spoiled generation a little bit too. I say we, I mean me, with guys like Buster Posey and Matt Wieters before that kind of declined. Joe Mauer, now Sal Perez. You look at they're offensive catchers, and I think this, and I don't know if it's going to be the Mauer effect or. At one point, I thought it was going to be the Posey effect, but he's sort of come back roaring with a vengeance. That I just truly think we're going to get to an era in baseball where you take good offensive players. If they're behind the plate, if you draft them as catchers, you've got to move them. You've got to get a position.
Put them to another position that's not first base. Because if you can, Bryce Harper played center field for a minute. Now I think he's in one of the corner spots.
He's in the corner for
right
but
fielder.
He still has defensive value as a fast kid in a corner outfield spot, and he's not tucked away at first base.
Yeah, if you go from catcher, which is thought to be one of, if not the most valuable defensive position, all the way to the other end of the defensive spectrum, which is first base, the easiest position to play besides designated hitter. Suddenly you lose a lot of the value that you're contributing to your team because you're only playing half of the game at that point, basically. And I do think if a guy's athletic enough, if a guy can hit as a high schooler or college player, teams are going to draft and they're going to look for the defensive catchers that you're talking about, guys that can really just handle it behind the plate. And I think you're going to separate that from the offensive athletic players like a Buster Posey, Joe Mauer, Sal Perez. I think eventually you're going to see those types of players in a corner outfield
So
spot.
the discussion is this. If I was to tell you, so the Twins took Mauer behind Mark Pryor in 2000 or 2001?
2001, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if I was to tell you right then that draft this kid and move him to first base, and I'll give you approximately 20 years, or he can catch and he's going to be really good, but after X amount of years, it's going to short circuit. That discussion might lead you to say, "I'll move him." That discussion. I'm not saying
That's
it would.
tough.
I'm not saying it would for sure. But if I tell you you're going to get 20
That's a good
years,
question.
20 years of not a power hitter, but an elite guy when it comes to average and on
20
base,
years of John
as
Olerud.
opposed to 10 to 12, and he's a catcher, and then it's going to go off the table.
Wow.
That's a tough discussion.
See, the thing is, for 10 years, almost 10 years, he was one of the greatest catchers of all time. Not defensively necessarily, but the whole package. No one has gotten on base at that clip as a catcher ever. So he was, back to the Hall of Fame trajectory point. Yeah. If you just took the best 10 years of everyone at every position, he'd be a Hall of Famer.
Right.
But it's about longevity. So I don't know, man. That's a tough one.
I really like that.
It
That's
is
a
an
good
interesting
question.
point. I thought you were going to go with if you could go back in time now, would you rather have Mark Pryor from, let's say, 2002 to 2005,
Yeah.
and then he flames out on those Twins teams that were really, really good, and they were sort of pre-Joe Mauer, because Mauer didn't really contribute till 05.
I'll take Mauer.
But would the Twins, here's another question, as we sort of deviate down a different path, would the Twins in 2003, 2004, when Mark Pryor was one of the best pitchers in baseball, and the Twins needed that. They
Pryor
had
and Johan.
Would they have won the World Series with those teams in 03, 04 with Mark Pryor?
Here's the question. Would the Ryan Garden hire management have had Mark Pryor up as quick as the Cubs did? And I'm serious, but I'm not kidding you guys. I'm serious. I think if you're going to say, could Mark Pryor have helped this team go up for a second, win a World Series, and then his arm goes.
Although maybe his arm wouldn't have went because Dusty Baker ran.
And Dusty
Wood
is one of the
Pryor
worst of all
into the
time.
ground.
Yeah. Dusty Baker could not handle
those guys
pitching
were
staff.
puppy dog eyes begging to come out of games at 120 pitches, and Dusty's arms crossed.
But if
Go get him, kid.
But if Joe Mauer gets moved to right field, let's say early in his career, I'm going to guess right now that we're not seeing this, which is bang. I mean, it might have declined, but I don't think it would have gone bang.
So here's the question then: do you try to accumulate all that value in the first 10 years and take a couple shots at it, which the Twins did? I mean, you look at. Do you think they would give back 2006? Probably not.
No,
I mean,
in fact, they got
Justin Morneau, Joe
unlucky.
Mauer, Francisco Liriano, Johan Santana, Brad
Pryor.
Radke. Was that the Bartlett Punto year when they took over the left side of the field? I mean, that's a team that you're just going to take a shot with. And injuries to Liriano and to some extent Radke, they missed. But they were there to have taken a shot. I don't know if you... That's a really interesting question. I don't think I would.
The one thing about Mauer that makes this discussion difficult is as a catcher, he was good. Piazza was a guy that you put up with catching because he played in the National League and was so good at the plate. But Mike Piazza, I'd say, had way more deficiencies as a catcher. Joe Mauer was a good catcher. He might not have been great, but he was a good catcher. Yeah. So he wasn't a guy that you would look at immediately and say, liability, got to move him. And that's where the discussion gets difficult.
So what now? What if, because this is who he is right now, this is no longer, you can no longer hang your hat on, well, okay, he was really hot in April, or, hey, for 3 weeks around the All-Star break, he was a .330 hitter once again. You know, part of being a great hitter in baseball is to do what he used to do and do it over the course of 6 months and do it every single day. It's funny because he's actually pretty durable now. He's playing almost every day except for maybe 2 or 3 games all year. And you're sort of questioning, at some point, are they not going to be able to play him every day, not because of health, but because Max Kepler is now Max Kepler is now one of the best hitters in baseball in the minor leagues, and he's coming through the pipeline. They don't have a logjam right now because Vargas regressed, went back. Arcia sort of regressed. He's in the minor leagues. But if Sano doesn't take a U-turn, and if all of a sudden your outfield next year, because the logjam is sort of third base, first base, DH, and outfield. And if Plouffe's still on the team, and you've got Rosario, Hicks, Buxton, does Torii Hunter come back?
And by the way, I don't trade Plouffe. No way do I trade.
Either,
If there's a temptation to, stop it.
Yeah, I don't think
Trevor Plouffe is on this team, and as far as I'm concerned, as soon as I can, I move Sano to first base.
But there will be a point where, and maybe it doesn't happen right away next year, but at some point before Joe Mauer's contract is up, it's going to make a lot more sense to put Sano, Kepler, those other 3 outfielders we mentioned, Plouffe, in the lineup instead of Joe Mauer.
Yeah, I mean, for 3 seasons, you're going to have a really difficult task of allocating plate appearances. You're just not going to have enough defensive innings for some of these guys. And I want to circle back to something you brought up earlier, Phil, talking about he's hitting third right now because of reputation, despite the fact that he has a .330 on-base percentage and he's slugging .380 or something like that, which are pretty readily available, easy numbers to find.
And in fairness, he's been really good this year with runners in scoring position.
Sure, that's fine.
But not sustainable to have, whatever it is, 100 points difference between your overall average and your clutch average.
But if I'm saying, okay, hey, you're going to give 600 plate appearances to a guy who's going to get on base 33% of the time and have a slugging percentage of .380, whatever his offensive numbers are going to be from this point going forward, you can either have this player or player X. And in the Twins' case, they're going to have a lot of choices from player X. Miguel Sano, Trevor Plouffe, Oswaldo Arcia, Kenny Vargas, Eddie Rosario, Byron Buxton, Aaron Hicks. There aren't enough places for those. And Max Kepler, too. Let's not forget about him. How many of those players are you willing to pass on to shoehorn Joe Mauer into lineup? And I think that's the dicey question. There's so much respect there. There's so much equity, because he's built up a lot of equity in his time with the Twins.
Sure,
and the question becomes, man, how long can you keep just trying to respect him and do what's right by Mauer? compared to a 2016 Twins team that, boys, I don't know if we've started looking at this, but absolutely should be competitive in the American League.
It'll be a massive disappointment if they're not.
They absolutely should be contending, whether it's for a wild card or at the Central Division.
Well, since they already are right now,
and they're
they're
incomplete.
going to get better next
Right,
year,
Correct.
But-
So the question is, how long can you continue going down that path of, well, Mauer's going to get 600 plate appearances?
But it should be Kansas City and the Twins next year. I'm not talking about a second wild card next year. I'm talking about contending for the division title. But here's my question. Molitor, to me, has done a lot of good things this year. And he has brought fresh ideas, and he's made some decisions that are probably tough. This is the toughest one. This might be, if he lasts in this job for 10 years, this might be the solely toughest job that he has, which is to take Joe Mauer, who he respects the hell out of, and say to Joe, hey, look, I got to do X, Y, or Z here, and it's for the betterment of the team. Do you think he can do it? Because that is where you get into a really tough discussion. Because there are things that can be done here. I mean, Mauer signed through 2018. He's paid a lot, but there's no salary cap here. You're basically asking him to swallow his pride and bite the bullet. Can this organization do that to Joe Mauer? That's the key question.
I guess we'll find out this offseason, right?
I mean, I think he's the one player, just because of the contract and everything else, hometown marketing, where it wouldn't just be a Paul Molitor decision. I think that's the one player where Molitor might say this, and then somebody above might say something different.
I think there are two players. I think Torii Hunter falls into that same category. I think you've got to figure out between Mauer and Torii Hunter if you're willing to have the conversation that, hey, you're a part-time player now.
It probably doesn't make sense for both those guys next year to be regulars in the lineup, right?
But I agree with you. I should have
Mauer
said
will be a regular in the lineup next year. I should make it clear. Everything we're saying right now, Mauer will be a regular in next year's lineup.
Doesn't matter what we say.
Yeah.
But so I agree with you. And yet, that leaves the Twins in this weird place of, okay, well, are you actually competitive, or do you care more about hanging on to the past or hanging on to players who've been there for you?
Keeping them happy.
And got you through, keeping them satisfied, keeping their ego not bruised
Right.
and untarnished. I think that's going to be the mark of a good baseball team. Are you willing to make decisions that could potentially crush somebody's ego because it makes you better on the field?
Two very different discussions, though, in my opinion. Hunter is a guy that if you bring him back, which I think they will in 2016, you are transitioning him out of baseball, and he has to get that. I mean, this is a guy who I think in the Twins' mind ideally plays one more year and then goes to work in some capacity for this team and is a lifetime Twin and comes out on Sundays and throws out first pitches, and, oh, man, this is great.
And 48's hanging out in left field.
Yeah, exactly. Joe Mauer is a guy who this discussion is difficult because you're going to actually have to start transitioning him out of baseball when he doesn't want to be out. And if you continue to play him, if you start spring training next year and say, Joe, you're our first baseman, this is fantastic, you're going to be our first baseman for as long as you want, you are running the risk of sabotaging in some ways a team that should be really good and might be better. I'm not saying he shouldn't play, but if you just run him out there as your first baseman on a daily basis, I think you're doing a disservice to your franchise.
So I think we should throw this notion out, even though I know everyone sitting in this room is going to laugh at it, but it is a question that people throw out as a solution. What do you do with Joe Mauer? Put him at catcher again. You're paying him anyways to be a catcher, so why doesn't he just go back and catch? Or maybe because he's left-handed, he platoons with Kurt Suzuki at catcher and then put him at first base once in a while, whatever. He will never go back to catching, so it's not even a conversation because the Twins would never do it.
And you can't do
concussions, everything else. And if he was already sort of tailing off performance-wise a little bit in his last run as catcher, he wasn't throwing out as many base runners. He was getting nicked up and injured, couldn't stay on the field. Imagine what it's going to be like when he's now 33 years old and you're putting him back there for the first time in 3 full years. It's just, it might sound good if you're running a fantasy baseball team and, oh, this guy's got catcher, position eligibility. So I'll just put him at catcher. Oh, Evan Gattis, I can put him at catcher. Well, yeah, but that's not how it works for actual major league teams.
World Series teams don't put Evan Gattis at catcher.
Well, and teams in pro sports, I think, have to make tough choices, and it can suck sometimes. Putting Mauer back at catcher would be callous. I mean, this is a guy that you moved because of concussions. You can't do it.
He would have to sign off on it too.
But I'm just saying you couldn't even consider you didn't move him because he was starting to struggle as a catcher. You moved him because his brain was goofed up for months.
Right.
You can't ask a guy whose brain is goofed up to say,
but you're not that valuable at first base. You just don't help us.
And the other thing too with this whole conversation, I hate the vibe of ragging on someone, ripping them, and putting them out to pasture when they were so good for that long. And that's kind of what sports are, where I know as a front office you have to have that mindset because you should be about the team more than the individual. The Lakers with Kobe Bryant. They gave him a 2-year, $48 million contract, and he hadn't yet rehabbed from a torn Achilles. Do you care more about the team or pleasing Kobe? And they said Kobe, which now I think you're finding out if you're watching basketball, it's not working for the Lakers. So as a front office, I do think you have to be a little bit more ruthless, even if you did sign a guy to a contract, you have a good relationship.
Yep.
But as fans and media and onlookers, you do have to give a standing ovation and applaud some. And I do think there's a Derek Jeter effect in some ways where, he's a shell of his former self, but holy cow.
Yeah.
That guy was ridiculous for 15 years or 20 years, or in Joe Mauer's case, 10 years.
The sad thing about this, though, is it's probably not going to end really well, and the way it's ending is sad. If Joe Mauer got to, let's say, 40 years old, then you're like, oh, okay. Torii Hunter might go out in sort of a sad way, but at the end, you're going to still say to yourself, it's fine.
It's amazing that he was productive toward his 40th birthday.
The Mauer thing is weird because, as I said, it's a cliff, and he just dropped off it. Mm-hmm. And if he doesn't come back, that's a huge fall. Everybody else sort of rode down the cliff. But if you want to look at front offices making tough decisions, I mean, look at Favre and the Packers. Favre ultimately wanted to go back to Green Bay, but you tell me, did Ted Thompson and Mike McCarthy do the right thing? Absolutely. And as much as Mauer might mean to this franchise here, nobody's more important to their franchise than Favre was to the Packers. And they still, when Favre came back to him and said, I do want to play, they said, no, you can't. Sorry.
Mauer still is at an age where you could hold out some hope. I do think he's playing every day, at least, until further notice next year. Mm-hmm. And then sometime next year, if he's still the same guy he's been the last 2 years, which is there's a pretty good chance, right? I mean, he's going the wrong way on the age curve. He's already caught for 10 years. I don't think it gets super awkward until sometime next year. Now, maybe he shocks us and renders this last 30 minutes a joke by hitting 300 again, or by getting on base at a different clip, or becoming a better defensive first baseman. That's another thing too. If he all of a sudden becomes a little more like Justin Morneau in his prime at first, or Dougie Minkiewicz.
But there's no sign of any of this.
As much, but he's not really that either.
There's no sign of this.
Not yet. I mean, he's not terrible at first base, but he's not exactly.
He's okay.
He's not a Gold Glove candidate or anything.
The awkward part about it is how much he's done for the Twins, how great he was, but now the realization that in the very near term they're going to have better options.
Yeah,
a lot of different places. We've seen Miguel Sano in his first 115 plate appearances. Absolutely looks like he belongs in the middle of the lineup right now. I wrote about this for 1500ESPN.com. Not many 22-year-olds make the big leagues. Even fewer hold their own in the big leagues. Mm-hmm. So for the basic fact that he's come on and been one of the best Twins players in his 6 weeks in the big league so far is amazing, and it's in its own right. And we're getting to the point here where it's, guys, I don't think it's a fluke. Yeah, he's going to struggle sometimes as the league starts to adjust to him and all that stuff. But because of his approach, because of he draws walks as often as he does, because of the power, because of the hit tool, it's starting to look like this guy's just the real deal. And I got to tell you, if you have an option between having Miguel Sano and Trevor Plouffe at first and third, respectively,
yes,
and Trevor Plouffe, Joe Mauer, and Miguel Sano, your question becomes down to who would you be DHing in that other situation? Yeah. And there's a decent chance that DH candidate is going to be better than Joe Mauer offensively.
And right now, you can, there's still a spot at DH and first base because there's just not enough really good players on the roster.
It's going to get weird.
Then if you call up Kepler in September and Buxton's up here again, and and the light bulb is on, and the season ends and the light bulb was on for those guys,
it's going to get weird.
Well, yeah. So what do you do? I mean, ideally in 2016, if this is who Joe Mauer is right now, do you play him, I don't know, take your pick, 3 days a week, and do you play him a little bit at first and you DH him a little bit? Because you're not going to bench him full time or make him just a pinch hit specialist. Boy. But
so
do you go to a system like that?
I start the year, he's my starting first baseman in 2016. He was so good for 10 years, and he still shows flashes, and even if I think in my brain and my heart, if I'm Terry Ryan, that it's not going to work, I'm starting him at first base. Just he gets that respect from me, and maybe it's the wrong baseball decision, but I think he deserves that human side of it. And then I don't know what the answer to that question is if we get to July and Max Kepler is sitting down there like, guys,
how long do you want me to hit 350?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is. I honestly don't.
There's not an easy answer, and that's why this is.
Do you give him some? Does he play first? Does he DH?
I
Does
don't know
he
that
play some
moving
left
around
field
helps
once
him.
in a while?
I don't
no idea.
I don't want him
I don't
playing
know.
left field over Rosario or
I know.
Hicks. You know,
Because look at that defensive
Well, and
outfield alignment that they
they're
could
all
have
center
next
fielders
year.
out there.
And
right
think
now.
about this with Hicks
Rosario,
now.
Buxton, Hicks.
And think about the difference with this team now. You have potentially 2016 opening day, Rosario on left, Buxton in center, Hicks in right.
Right.
And all can hit, by the way, too now.
Yeah, and then you've got a choice between
And nothing's going to drop.
Oswaldo Arcia or Max Kepler as your fourth outfielder, and one of those
I think
guys.
Garcia's gone.
Maybe.
I think they're going to really try and pedal him.
I think this is going to be a winter that'll be very interesting for the Twins because they have sort of these log jams. So some of the Joe Mauer question depends on what moves they make, but I would expect the Twins to be active this winter.
All right. Well, I don't know if we actually solved the problem there, but
No, but I need to solve a problem getting another beer. I've been empty for about 15 minutes now, and it's not okay.
Well, hold on. So it hasn't been Sports Over Beers for
Well,
15 minutes for you?
I started with one, but boys, we just spent
Back
too
in the
long
old days,
talking.
I would get up and go get around. But because we're taping now, I didn't feel comfortable. I should have just left and gotten around.
Less talking, more drinking. That's my solution for Sports Over Beers.
we'll work on that for future episodes. Derek Wetmore, Judd Zulgad, Phil Mackey. See you next time. Sports Over Beers and Sports Over Beers TV until we all get fired for showing our ugly mugs
Never know.
on camera.
Stop TV.